Hey everybody, Raul here. Today we have the great honor and pleasure of chatting with Kim Bjørn. He is a co-author and publisher of the book Pedal Crush, Stompbox Effects for Creative Music Making. The reason that we're talking today is because pedals are of interest to a lot of the people in the bass community and the synth community, because Kim's background is a synthesizer musician. So there's a lot of principles in this amazing book that I have in front of me that we want to talk about. But I digress. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Kim, and your musical background. How did you get started kind of in this whole thing?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I got started as a very young kid, as a lot of other musicians, with, being introduced to the piano and having a bit of classical training and stuff. But then, as many other people, I discovered the tape recorder. And then things went the usual way, playing in a band in school. The guitarist had some pedals that was interesting. How does that sound with my keyboard, whatever I had at the time. And so that's how it went. But at some point I had to give up playing music because I had to earn some money. And I became a graphic designer. But I always played music on the side, so to speak. And so it was like in 2017, I actually got the chance to do my first book in this line of books that I'm doing now. And that was about the interfaces of instruments. How do we interface with instruments? Electronic instruments primarily. Why do they look the way they do? What's out there? And that was a thing I had wanted for a long time to do. So that was quite exciting. That was the book Push, Turn, Move. And already at that time, I wanted to explore pedals at some point, effect pedals. Because it's just so, from a graphical point of view, that was my first idea, that they look so crazy cool, So much variety, so many colors, knobs, all these exciting things. What can they do with these little magical boxes? And so the idea evolved, and it became apparent that there's so much into it, obviously. And so today it's just so great that I could do this book with Scott Harper, who's a guitarist, and we could get this chance to explore all these different pedal types and explain them to people and inspire them to use them in different ways. That's the basic purpose of this book, Pedal Crush.
Part of what you did is you compiled 40 interviews. So it's not just your point of view. You brought in a lot of the heavy hitters of the industry, people that when us bass players who maybe don't use as many pedals will still recognize these people that as folks that are authorities in their area. And it goes into so much detail down to, in some instances, kind of the circuitry, the things inside of the little boxes, which I don't think about too much, because every time you open them up, ever since we've gone to more solid state electronics, I'm good with resistors, capacitors, and variable rheostats. But when we start adding boards and chips, I'm kind of like, I'm not sure what that does. But it's an extraordinarily thorough, illustrated. It has just a ton of audio effect concepts and chains, and how kind of to link things. And again, I think the main thrust is based on your background with synthesizers and guitars. But there's a lot of takeaway for bass players, because a big part of this whole process is kind of the experimentation and the trial of error. And this gives kind of a foundation on maybe a guide on how to kind of proceed if you're going to go down that path, to have a kind of a little more like a map to follow.
Definitely, yeah. It's like a journey through all the effects types also. The book is really structured after the different types of effects in the way we thought was the most logical way, maybe. Starting with about how to put a pedal board together, thinking about power, expression pedals maybe, and then also gain-based pedals like boost, fuzz, distortion, overdrive, all that stuff. And then going into dynamics, frequency, and time-based effects like delay and reverb and freeze, glitch, granular, all that exciting stuff. And obviously a big chapter on modulation and pitch also. And then a little bit about timeline, a historical timeline in the end, to wrap things up and give some more historical perspective on things. So it is really, yeah, and we are going into what is a resistor, what is a diode, and what is an inductor. Because I think it's important to know not just the outside, but also the inside and the jargon or the words people use. So it is basically, as I see it, this is the book I wanted myself when I went into pedals, kind of a lexica or a Bible, or this has everything you need to get an overview and to get inspired. And I think, and to know what's the difference between fuzz and distortion, for example. Let's say if you're playing the violin and you want to use effects pedals, you may not know what the difference is and how it reacts to your instrument. So it's trying to get around all these things in one book, and that's why it kept growing while we made it. We started out as maybe around 300 pages or so, and I think we came up to like 376 pages or so. Yeah. It was hard to stop again. And I mean, now we have NAMM and new pedals coming out, so it's an ever-growing, fortunately ever-growing world of little toolboxes we can use.
Got you. Well, and I will mention for the bass players that are seeing this, it touches, again, all of those basic concepts apply to what we're looking at. There are some examples of some of the specific bass pedals, but it is more directed towards, again, synth and guitar playing, and you can take the principles, and I know as somebody who spends their time looking at a lot of the bass pedal industry, you'll see some that you recognize, and then you'll go, well, wait, how about this one? I'm not seeing them there. And as I was mentioning to Kim before we started recording, he may need to do a separate book dedicated entirely to the world of bass pedals, because again, it is such a vast field, and a lot of times there is crossover when a guitar player, I've spoken to many bass players that said the guitar player in their band said, hey, you need to try this pedal, and they fell in love with it. And they're like, yeah, I really like that. Or they've tried putting their bass into the guitar player's other pedal, and they're like, no, I don't care for how that sounds. Even one bass player I talked to gave a whole pedal board to the guitar player of his band because he had so many things he'd tried and he just didn't quite love them, but they were perfect for the guitar player, so he made him up a whole board. But that said, I think that, and even with the synthesizer angle, I'm curious, because when I think of synthesizers, I think of something that is already offering you so many sounds.
Exactly, yeah.
Out of itself, the synthesizer itself. How do pedals tie into synthesizer use?
I think it's again, pedals are very immediate usually, and you can, if you have a synth in front of you, no matter how digital or analog it is, you might be able to just turn up a reverb or a delay or choose another type of delay, maybe between the three types of delay. But if you have effects pedals, you're able to put your own effects chain together. You're able to dial in things maybe live in a situation on a stage in the moment, and basically also to get beyond that maybe preset sound or that sound of the Nord keyboard or whatever it is,
Sure.
So I think it's very much also, and a lot of the artists we've interviewed in the book, like even people like Tycho, Ed O'Brien from Radiohead, or a producer like Joe Barresi, it's about also creating a signature sound, or maybe something that works for you, maybe in the band you play, maybe in the specific context, maybe even in a recording context also. So I think those, you could say, removable effects, you can change them around, change the pedal order. It just provides so much more flexibility, and it also gives you the option of becoming more personal in your sound, I think. And there is something to be said about the immediacy. I mean, that's what I learned a lot about doing this book. How much more string players, guitarists, bassists, whatever, you listen a lot more when you move your fingers in a certain way, or you just dial the knob like 2 millimeters, whatever. And for a keyboard player, it's a bit more about some playing technique or adjusting the filter a bit, but it's different. There's a lot to listening to how your instrument reacts to the pedals and the other way around. So I think this whole exercise of listening to the sound that you're going after, and listening to, am I going away from it? Am I going near it? Now, what do I need to change? And as you also have mentioned before this talk, that sometimes it's just like, what is this guy using, or this girl? What's she playing? What's on her board? And I think for me at least, it's not about. I always try personally to avoid the obvious choices when it comes to pedals or modules, whatever. And that's because I want to see if I can achieve it in another way, and not just recreate a sound. I mean, if you play in a band playing popular songs from other bands, you need to recreate certain sounds, right? So, but at some point you maybe need to, or want to, or have to create your own sound, and that's where you really need to know what's out there, I think, because you can borrow a pedal from your lead guitarist or whatever, but I think if you know the basics of how to do, like, say, gain staging pedals, how can you control the gain at different stages in your pedal chain? Are your bassist changing your bass between sets or between tracks when you're playing live? Do you need some kind of a mixer with different level settings before your first pedal? There are so many nuances, details, that you could explore, and that's why I think it's important to have some kind of knowledge base where you build upon. It's much easier to choose a pedal if you know a bit about what's out there than just what's right in front of you. Absolutely. That's when you make the bad choices, when you choose a pedal. That looks cool. Yeah. That sounds cool when this guy plays it. But then you get home, you plug it in, and it doesn't sound at all like that. Right?
Absolutely.
So, but then if you know that there's 10 more pedals like this, but with different other features maybe, and you might be able to choose in more wisely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, one point.
Well, and it's interesting because we've had questions, especially when it comes to some of the like old 60s rock bands and things. And I had somebody inquire what pedals somebody was using. And when I did the research, what I discovered is it wasn't a pedal at all. It was the amplifier of the time that had a distorted sound. And it's a company that's no longer even in business. And maybe it was because not many people really liked the distorted sound. But in the 60s, in a particular like acid rock format, it was the sound that they were looking for. Now, bringing that fast forward, also I'm aware that a lot of the Broadway shows, they will use pedals because they need a variety of sounds, and they don't have time to do a lot of changes in settings. And so there is kind of that instantaneity where you can click on a button and now things are this way, or you can roll a little dial this way and now it's some other way. So there's just tons of applications. I think that most people, though, are just kind of lost without a map, like your book, to know even where to start. It just kind of gets a little overwhelming. If you were talking to maybe somebody who was starting, how would somebody want to start building a pedal board? What would we look at?
I mean, it depends. If the obvious choice where many starts is with a multi-effects pedal, because then they can try out different stuff and see what they like. But also it can get quite confusing because you might not get really into the nitty-gritty things about when you can adjust the different elements of an effect. But I mean, if you're obviously, I guess you mean if you're a bass player, where would you start? Or
sure. Well, probably even it might apply kind of to everybody, and I know that there's even so many choices, even in a platform to put your pedals on. I mean, you've got people that are using Velcro, people that are using ties, people that are using, there's one company that makes kind of a pedal board where you insert the pedals into it, and they've got all of the interconnection all built in. So it's just kind of a drop in and go kind of situation. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think my advice would be to start simply with maybe just one pedal and simply explore it. You don't need a board, you only need one power supply, and then start slowly building from there. But it all depends on where you want to go with your music or your sound. I mean, what you said about the amp and how do I get that sound? I think if you ask the person asking that question, well, how does it sound to you? Are there any higher harmonics on the bass that are more present, for example? Or is there some kind of bandpass filtering? Or, what's actually going on? Is it kind of a widening effect, like a chorusing effect? So learning to listen after the effect, what could this be? Mm-hmm. I think that will help people a lot more with actually achieving that sound they want. And instead of what pedal it is, what's the outcome of the pedal? What's of that effect? Many keyboards players, they start with some kind of time-based effect, like a reverb. They might drench their whole playing in, shimmer reverb, and it sounds amazing. Yeah, you can even fart into a shimmer reverb and it sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So it really depends on what you want to do. But obviously that wouldn't work for bassists. I mean, you would want something that reacts more to your playing, and I'd say something like a fuzz pedal, for example, or just a boost would probably, or maybe even a distortion would give you something to start with and see how your playing affects the reaction in the pedal, and with all the different settings you can do. It depends on how expressive your instrument is. Mm-hmm. In the book, we are interviewing also a harp player, and even a beatboxer, a dub FX, who is a loop artist also. And does he want to create a bass sound or a lead sound? It's different effects. Obviously, it's easier to use something that affects your signal more, so you can always learn the subtleties of things. Mm-hmm. But if you have a quite drastic impact, it's good because you can hear a difference, and then you can dial it down from there.
Yes.
So I think but overall, our advice is, start with one pedal and explore everything you can with that. That's basically it.
Gotcha.
That's the simple tip. Because, we have over 800 pedals in the book, and there's hundreds of pedals more out there, maybe even thousands.
Sure. Well, and I think with some things, and again, as you mentioned, like a reverb, when you mention reverb, a sound comes to mind. When you mention a chorus, a sound comes to mind. But something that a lot of times people get a little confused is compression. Kind of what does a compression be? And many bassists love a compression on their pedal board. So how does that affect the sound? Because again, you don't think of, how is it squeezing it? What is it doing?
In short words, a compressor makes the lower volumes. It's hard for me to express this in English because I'm Danish, but sorry for my Danklish.
No worries.
But basically, you have the lower levels getting higher without the higher levels getting lower. Basically, you squish it together. I'd say you get more presence out of your sound. It will usually reveal the subtleties of your playing, whether you want it or not. So learning to dial in a compressor is also important. Also, especially for bass players, I think in relation to the tempo you're playing, the style of music you're playing. I mean, you know more of this because you're a bassist. Mm-hmm. But I mean, setting the envelope controls on a compressor, the attack and the decay times in relation to the rhythm you're playing is crucial. So there are things to learn there, and it might be easier to just have a simple boost pedal, maybe, if you just want to play louder, or you're going into the chorus and you want to just take it up a notch or whatever. It depends. But I think that one of the things I actually discovered also was how many things that synth players take for granted, like filtering and envelope controls, that guitarists might not think about so much. You might not think about having a filter in your chain because you might think that's, what does it actually do? And do I need to filter out any harmonics? You don't know until you might hear somebody using it, or you find out that's the sound I want. How can I achieve that? So I think that's interesting that there are certain effects that are more, obviously also now we talk bass, that are more specific to the specific instruments. But if you try to change them a bit around, like something, now we talk compression, like side chain compression, is interesting for a bass player, obviously, or they might hate it. I don't know. But in dance music, it's like it's a given. You need to do it and all that stuff. But in a live situation, it might clear up the whole bass end of things and make things easier for the sound engineer. If you just have a bit of sidechain compression on your bass from the bass drum from a drummer, or stuff, little things like that could actually help. That's where also I see the pedals as kind of a surgical tool. I think you can go subtle, or you can go, I want this to really come through. But you can adjust things easier, even if you don't go after a certain sound. You can just tweak your sound to fit the environment you're playing in, maybe. I know we're all home at the moment, but that's actually the perfect time to practice with pedals, I think, right?
Absolutely. Well, and as you mentioned, so many of them have such creative appearances, and I think that many times us humans are attracted by the packaging of whatever, how it looks, and if it's flashing and it's doing things. I mean, just the artwork. And you could probably do a whole book on just pedal box artwork, because there's just some amazing. And some companies are doing handmade drawing, paintings on each pedal, so it's unique and so forth. But that is a factor that only the musicians get to enjoy. The audience doesn't see all of the niceties that are on their pedals.
Exactly. What surprised me also was this vast amount of really personal pedal builders who do maybe 2 or 3 or maybe just one pedal type or pedal at all, and they just have a passion for it and they create something really interesting, and then they go for it. I mean, I discovered a pedal builder almost in my backyard, so to speak, in Denmark, who created a pedal for Warren Ellis. That was interesting, and I didn't know that. So I visited him in his little workshop, and we talked about the process, and that came out as a 2-page interview in the book. But also we have known pedal builders, but they are also musical and talented. I mean, they are the true artists also. It comes from both sides, and all the musicians I've talked to doing this book, they are so grateful for all these people doing these wonderful tools for us to express ourselves in music. So, and that's actually some of the things that drive me making these books, that people are so appreciative of those creating the tools that they use to, not just create a living for themselves, but also express themselves as creative artists. And, as you say, the boxes are often art in themselves. It's amazing. Even the inside of boxes, you won't believe how much care people take in putting the wires correctly and in aligning stuff. It looks beautiful sometimes inside a pedal. Sometimes it's a mess, but that's cool too.
We always do have, I say, a great amount of gratitude, whether in the bass world it is to the luthiers that are building our instruments, that their whole area of concerns are so different, whether it's what wood they're using, what shape it has, how things are connected. I mean, it is the physicality that I appreciated, and I'm grateful, especially to be a bass player, because my world is a lot more simple than the synthesizer people's world. I can appreciate the nuances of the wood and the strings, and even the difference between an active bass, when you start adding in an EQ possibility, versus a passive bass that may have a whole lot less in your tonal varieties and things, but it has the dependability of, you don't have a battery that will ever go out on a passive bass. It's going to play fine no matter what you're doing. It's going to work just great. But with all of the electronic portions of it, and again, even inside of our instruments, the people that have developed the preamps or have made it easier to interchange pickups, or have, I agree, looking inside of a cavity in the basses is many times very impressive at how lovely and how tidy things were put together. But coming back to the book, it's a wonderful guide. There's so much information. There's so many interviews. It is a great starting point, I think, if somebody's thinking about getting into pedals. But if you already are into pedals and you've got a basic level of information, I think this is a great complement as well, because it's going to expand on what you already know, and maybe even explain something that you might have wondered about and thought, oh, that's how that's doing, because you may have gone just with the sound and have no understanding on what's going on kind of under the surface. And it's a fabulous book for bass players, guitar players, for our synthesizing musicians. I can see the addition. It makes perfect sense to me. And again, I tend to shy away when I see all the wires and lights on synthesizers because it's a lot more complicated than my bass. But if people want to get their very own copy of this, to have their guide into the world of pedals, where should they go?
They can get it at a variety of retailers, especially in the US, but our website is bjooks.com, bjooks.com. And we have an overview of our retailers. We are a Danish company, but we have resellers all over the world. We're out in like 55 countries. So you can get it. You can just ask your local music store if you want to support them, and I think that's a good idea in these times. So it's and also there are reviews out, and we link to some of them on our website also. So and you could also ask your lead guitarist; they might have it already.
Absolutely. So. Well, and I think it's also of great value to have kind of I'll call it an impartial third party, because it's always true. All manufacturers will tell you that whatever they make is what you need, and it is the best. And it will do everything. It's the greatest thing since sliced bread. But I think that's what gets confusing to so many musicians, is that we're bombarded by the ads and the promises. And if somebody says you need to have a battery power supply, or you need to clean the power going in, or all of these other things, like, is it because they sell the power supply and they just want to sell you the power supply, or do you really need that?
You might not always realize that all the influencers, the YouTubers showing off these things, obviously, you want the next thing because it just sounds great and it looks exciting and whatever, but it's hard to compare it to something. And I think actually it might sound old-fashioned, I know that, but a book actually gives you the option of experiencing this in your own pace and also without all the sales talk. And actually I'm really glad you got into this subject, because that's important to me to say that no one has ever paid to get in any of my books. That we are really neutral. We did one with Moog, but they didn't pay anything. But that's specifically their instruments.
Yeah.
And that's very clear. But with this book with over 800, we even had pedal builders not knowing they went into the book that their pedal was featured somewhere. But we just thought that this is a good example of this type of pedal in this context, whatever. And so it is really neutral, I'd say. It's really trying to be your best friend in going to the store and look at all the pedals, because it can be so overwhelming. And here you can take, okay, what's this about granular pedals? How can they help me? What can I do with them? What types are out there? How do they actually work? I must say also I've spent quite a lot of time on trying to illustrate the effects and settings and stuff, because I think there's a lot of, the visual side to this. You need to see things to understand them better, I think, not just read. So it's very illustrated. I think you can, you've read the books or seen the book, so you know that it's a lot of photos, a lot of illustrations on how to show different things. And I think that for me, it's more interesting than just reading words about it or hearing words about it.
Exactly. Well, and one of the areas that always seems to fall short with a lot of electronic and technical stuff is the instructions that come with whatever you got. That they're so I don't know, technical writers. They're proficient and it's correct, but it doesn't, I think, necessarily impart the information you need to actually get the most out of whatever you have. And so you're going...
Exactly. Yeah.
What?
But I understand it, because they want to explain things as correct as they can.
Yes.
But I think if you get a new pedal, I'd watch the first top 10 videos about that pedal and just to get different aspects of it. And I have to say, our book is not a manual to 800 pedals, just to be clear about that.
Sure.
Because that's impossible. But I think what's important is actually getting to know the principles of different effects. What's the actual principle of a delay? in contrast to a reverb. What is actually going on in a reverb? Well, a reverb is actually a kind of a delay. It's just many more delay lines, much faster, much closer, basically. And when you start to get that understanding of things, it's much more interesting, and you're able to kind of decipher maybe the manuals a bit better. And I think that's important too, because we want to use the gear we have to our best. I mean, get everything out of it we can. Especially when maybe money is tight, you want to have a pedal that can really, you can get everything out of it. At least to get to know where you find your sweet spots or your best features.
Absolutely. Well, Kim, we appreciate you and Scott taking time to do such a labor of love and do such a comprehensive piece of work. Again, it's an amazing book. It's all chock full of all kinds of beautiful photos and information. Pedal Crush Stompbox Effects for creative music making. Folks, you've seen him here. Kim Bjørn.
Thank you, Raul.